New International Version. And we're actually going to go to what would be considered a very boring, weird part of the Scriptures. And we're going to do that here in just a moment. But will you bow with me in prayer first? God, we're thankful this morning that we can come into this place to be together, to be connected. Father, to celebrate this first Sunday of Advent, to together worship you, hear about your word, and God, to really be reminded of why Jesus came. Father, I pray that would really be our focus, that we understand it, that we are reminded of it more than ever today, and we will thank you for it. In Christ's name, amen. I was not that athletic as a child, I can assure you, and I still remember when, and I don't know whether you did this when you were kids, but there would be like pickup basketball games and kickball games and, football and that sort of thing. And so everybody would line up. And of course, it was always the strongest, best looking, best in shape guys that were going to be the captains. And it was always obvious who they were going to be, right? So they would have the captains. So they'd start choosing teams. And they'd start to choose and they'd go, done, done. Done, done. And I'd still be standing there. Done, done. And then it was always like, all right, we'll take Bob. Now, you know how that felt as a kid. You're like, oh. Now, see, it's sort of funny, but I actually still feel the pain of it, because if it happened all the time, it's like you feel like you need therapy, right? Because maybe you knew what it was like to sit alone at the table. Maybe you knew what it was like to feel like an outcast to feel like you didn't belong. See, that happens a lot. There are times that we feel like outcasts, and there are times that we really are outcasts. And you think about the things that will often make us an outcast. There are a few of them, and I'll give them to you very quickly. Sometimes we feel like we're an outcast just because of our behavior. Our behavior could be so significantly different than the rest of people that it could be good. Maybe we're more moral or we have higher values, and so we are an outcast from that group of people. But we could also be an outcast because maybe we did something really, really bad. Maybe we violated somebody's trust. Maybe we stole something from somebody. Maybe we hurt somebody. And so because of that behavior, we're now an outcast from our family, an outcast from society. And we feel like we are isolated and we are alone because of our behavior, good or bad. Sometimes we feel like we're an outcast because of our belief systems, because of what we believe. We believe something is different. We believe that we are different. We believe perhaps that we have we have a particular faith that we adhere to, and maybe our faith is different than somebody else's. And so because of that, perhaps we are an outcast. Maybe we're somebody that doesn't believe. Maybe you're somebody that's struggling with belief. And unfortunately, some church people have treated you, if you say, I'm an atheist, they've treated you like you've got the plague. Or maybe you're an agnostic and you're like, I'm not sure about this whole thing and I'm still trying to find it out. But people, agnostic? How could you be an agnostic? And so you feel like you're an outcast. Sometimes we're an outcast because people are simply better than we are. Or at least we think they are. And we perceive them as being better. They perceive themselves as being better because they perhaps live in a different neighborhood. They drive a different car. They have a different, carry a different purse, or they have a different haircut, or they're something else. And so we feel like the outcast. Sometimes it's more than a feeling. Sometimes you really are sitting there all alone. And you wonder. That's kind of commercial break what this series is all about. This series is all about that. It's all about why God came near and what he's going to do. And the fact that he used imperfect people. And we're going to talk about why he did that. This morning, we're going to begin to talk about why he used imperfect people to accomplish this extraordinary thing that he did in the person of Jesus. So we're going to be looking at several different things, but it's important that we begin today at the beginning, at a really, really, really weird spot. At a place that probably you've gotten to before. If you've ever read the New Testament, you've probably gotten there and gone, what is this? Now, just in case, and let me start from the very beginning. Again, a lot of background is necessary this morning. But let me begin at the beginning. There are 4 historical accounts of Jesus' life in the Bible, in the New Testament. They are by 4 people, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There are only 2 of the accounts actually begin at Jesus' birth, Matthew and Luke. Luke tells a story, but Matthew begins with history. Now, it's interesting because actually the history that Matthew begins with also tells a story. But one starts with the birth, and one starts with way before the birth. And there's a reason why Matthew did that. And that's why this message today of Jesus being out for the outcast, it's so important that we start here. So Matthew begins, Matthew chapter 1, if you look at it. And I know if you've actually previewed it, you're going, wait a minute, he's not going to read the whole thing. If you read your notes, you see we're only going to go to about verse 5 or 6 in this. Listen to how Matthew, the disciple of Jesus, says this. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now let me just start there and continue there and give you a little more context. Matthew is writing to a predominantly Jewish audience. Because of that, the first thing the Jews are going to ask, if they're in their mind, they're looking at this, and he's writing to them, and he's going to tell them that Jesus is the Messiah, the promised one, they're going to go, oh yeah? Well, where's David in all this? Because David, he has to come from the line of David. So Matthew starts out this entire thing tracing in Matthew 1, very first thing, out of the starting gate, here is who Jesus is. Jesus, the Messiah, according to this entire line. And he starts not with Adam, but he starts with Abraham, which was the birth of the nation of Israel. When God said to Abraham, you see all the stars? That's going to be your descendants. I'm going to bless them that bless you. I'm going to curse them that curse you. And you, all the nations of the earth, will be blessed. So you are going to be the one. That's where the whole thing started, with Abraham. And so he starts with Abraham, and he says, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And he calls him the Messiah. Now, if you're giving a historical record for the Messiah, right? Going to give the historical record of the Messiah, you're going to want to make sure it's a pretty clean lineage, right? Come on, when you're talking about your relatives, you probably leave out certain people. You had an uncle or an aunt. My friend Dave Blood, he has a relative that stole, I think, the crown jewel or something in England. He told me to go see it while I was over there, and I forgot what his name was. But Pam and I saw it, and the guy had been a minister, and he actually stole the jewel that could never have been stolen. And so then he did such a good job with it, they asked him to be head of security for it after that, because they got it back. But there are people that we don't talk about in our lineage, and there's certainly things that if you're trying to prove about Jesus that you're going to leave out. And so Matthew takes a really weird turn. First of all, you don't mention women in the genealogy. You don't mention women in the genealogy, but watch this. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brother, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. We don't have any young children in here. We're going to talk about Tamar. She's going to come up again in the future. But there's 4 people that are mentioned in here, and I'm not going to get into all of them right now. But suffice it to say, Tamar tricked her father-in-law into believing that she was a prostitute so that he would sleep with her, and then she bore his child. That sounds more like Jerry Springer than Hallmark. As soon as the Jewish people read this, they're going, oh yeah, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David. And what in the world is Tamar doing in here? Like, she's the weird person. We don't want to talk. No, we don't talk about Aunt Tamar. Sweep her under the rug. Don't mention her. So he goes a little further. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Aminadab. Aminadab, the father of Nahshon. They're going, okay, he's all right now. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. And anybody that's been in church knows she is Rahab the... Stop, don't say it. You know who she is. She's got a title. Rahab, the prostitute. By the way, when I did a sermon on her a long time ago, and I wanted to title it one thing, and I told you all I couldn't title it that, the title of that sermon was going to be "When God Called a Call Girl." Because Rahab was a prostitute, and she wasn't part of Israel. And I'm sure the people that read this are going, hang on a second. So you got Tamar, who kept it in the family. You got Rahab, who was a prostitute that was suddenly brought into the family, and she's showing up in the line of the Messiah. Okay. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Hold on a second. Now, Ruth was a good lady. The problem was she was a Moabite. You didn't hang out with the Moabites. Nobody hung out with the Moabites. So she's in there because of what she was not. Wait a minute, this one's better. Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed the father of Jesse. Jesse the father of King David. There he is. King David. That's him. That's the one. This is who Jesus came from. David was the father of Solomon. I love this. He can't even name her. Whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Can anybody name her? Bathsheba. You know the story of David. You know, he saw Bathsheba one day, moved Uriah, her husband, up to the front of the line, so he got killed, and then he took Bathsheba as his wife, and it's kind of like what the crazy uncle that we don't talk about that had somebody murdered and took his wife and all of that. Now, I could go on, but have you seen enough? Should make you feel better about your family tree. Right? That's the point. The question as to why in the world would Matthew include these sordid Jerry Springer National Enquirer details in his genealogy. There are some things that are just better left unsaid. Some things that are better just left out. Some things that we just don't talk about that happen in the family that if somebody wants to reveal them later on, it's okay, but probably we don't want to talk about that part of the family. And maybe you have been that part of the family that nobody wants to talk about. So the question becomes, why did Matthew do this? Let's go to Matthew chapter 9, and we're going to spend the rest of our time there. And that is over, it should be around page 790. Matthew chapter 9. Give me some, again, it's necessary to know some of the background. Jesus has just come off of the boat. You know, he was in there was a lot of little cities around the Sea of Galilee. And so they would sail from one port to the other. And by the way, if you think taxes are bad in the United States, they were horrible in Jesus' time. Because whenever the Romans needed something, they would just have another tax. They had port taxes, they had bridge taxes, they had walking taxes, they had all these different, whenever they wanted more money, they would simply have a tax. So what happened is Jesus has probably met somewhere. We don't know whether they brought this guy to Jesus on the dock, whether he had gotten off the dock. But anyway, they bring this paralyzed guy to him, and Jesus looks at him, and they're waiting for him to heal. And Jesus looks at him and says, "Your sins are forgiven." And they're like, "Time out. That is not what we wanted. We wanted you to make him walk. You are nobody to forgive sins. Who do you think you are?" So this kind of ignited a little bit of an issue. Now, all of a sudden, as Jesus is walking along, and we find this beginning in Matthew chapter 9, and you can jump down after all of this to verse 9. We don't know where this guy Matthew was sitting. We know he was sitting at the tax collector's booth, but we don't know where the tax collector's booth was. I think it was probably perhaps something like a toll booth. Just like you have to go through. Now you can, you got your Sun Pass and you can go through and it gets you automatically. But if you don't have the Sun Pass, they send you a nasty letter and we're going to fine you and put you in jail and, all this kind of stuff. So there was a place that they had to pass through. So we don't know whether the disciples were having to pay these taxes or not. Now watch this. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting in the tax collector's booth. Okay. Let's talk about this for a minute. Another historical part that's sort of important for us to understand. In the New Testament, if you read it routinely, you will see in there that there's the constant reference made to two different groups of people: tax collectors and sinners. I constantly talk about there's tax collectors and sinners. The tax collectors are mentioned with like the worst of the worst, the sinners. Now here's the reason why. As I said, the Romans, they had to constantly raise taxes, whatever they wanted to do it. They start another tax. You want to put a tax on sitting in the pew, we'll put a tax on sitting in the pew. We need more money, so we're going to now tax you. So they tried to figure out how were they going to do this to collect these taxes from the Jewish people, because they were under the Roman provinces and all of that, the Roman government. So what they would do is they would go out to certain Jewish people in the Jewish community, and they would say to them, listen, we want to make you a tax collector. Here's a contract, and there's discrepancies as to how long these contracts lasted. And here's what you could do, Mr. Tax Collector. You, Mr. Tax Collector, we're going to give you this contract. You're going to take this contract. You collect the taxes. Here's what we want you to collect. And whatever you can collect over and above that belongs to you. Whatever you can get over and above that belongs to you. The tax collectors were some of the wealthiest people around. They were also the most conniving people. Everybody, if you see the tax collector, it's like, I hate these people. I just go, and you don't want to, you want to smile at them, be very passive aggressive and say, here, because they'll charge you another non-smiling tax or a sarcastic tax or whatever and the Roman government is going to hold you to it. So you're basically out of luck. So everybody hated the tax collectors, except other tax collectors. They'd all get together and tell their tax collector stories. Okay? Everybody hated the tax collectors. And if you were Jewish under the Roman government, already it was a problem. But now you've aligned yourself with the Roman government and you're collecting money from your own people and you're just extricating whatever you can from these people. That's who Matthew was. Nobody wanted to be around Matthew. So they go there. There it is. So they go there. Notice this. Jesus went on from there. He saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. And he says, wait a minute, watch this. Follow me. What? Now, I can imagine. Just go with me for a minute. Think about this. Think about Peter. Jesus. Come here. Jesus. Listen. Why are you telling him to follow you? He's a tax collector, Jesus. He's been ripping our people off. And now you want him to be one of us? I don't want to be around him. I could almost hear James and John, the sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder, who had tempers, probably going ballistic over the fact that they were going to get Matthew in there. What do you think Judas said? Because Judas was already stealing, and Judas is probably thinking, I'm in trouble. I'm already getting money. This guy's going to be stealing some of what I want. Can't imagine the discussion that is going on among the disciples. When Jesus looks at a tax collector, the most hated person in this day, the person that had violated the trust of all other Jewish people, the person who had aligned himself with the Roman government, the person that was an outcast from the standpoint they couldn't go to the temple, they were considered to be unclean, they weren't allowed to worship with the Jewish folks, they were literal outcasts, and Jesus walks up to the guy in the tax collector booth, he's supposed to be the Messiah, and he goes, hey Matthew, follow me. Wow. Follow me. Notice what happens. He told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Now I know preachers love to tell the story here. We like to think, oh, Matthew got up and followed him, and he forsaked all of his old life, and he never did this, never went back to work again, and he just followed. We don't know any of that. But we know that day that he said, follow me. Now, what he didn't know was where he was following him to. It's even worse. Because watch this. I can just imagine as Matthew is walking with them, because Jesus had to walk everywhere. Imagine as they're walking, the disciples. What do you think other disciples are doing? Matthew's probably up there talking to Jesus. Peter's probably behind him, discussing with John, going, "What's wrong with Jesus? Why is this guy with us?" You can hear it all the way to the back, especially the other ones that have already followed him are like, why in the world? He has raised people from the dead. He's healed the sick. He's done all of these miracles. We've already seen this happen. And now he doesn't have enough sense to know that he shouldn't align himself with a tax collector? I'd like to think they didn't know where they were going. Because when he said, follow me, what Jesus basically was saying to him at that moment, Matthew, follow me to your house because we're having dinner with you. What? Notice what happens. Jesus was now, we pick it up, having dinner at Matthew's house. Notice what's happened now. Remember what I told you, the phrase? Tax collectors and what? Notice what it says. While Jesus was having dinner with Matthew's house, many what? Tax collectors and many what? Ate with him and what? Who were they eating with? Jesus and who else? His disciples. That's great. Jesus made them all have dinner with him. They're already complaining about Matthew. Why is Matthew with us? Now all of a sudden they've been joined by a bunch of other tax collectors, a bunch of the other dregs of society, a bunch of other people the Jews didn't talk to, the Romans didn't talk to. They're looking at this like, why in the world are we there? I can imagine their judgmental nature. They're going, eating, wondering what's up. Being very quiet, watching, what is Jesus doing? Why are we doing this? And they're eating, and they're wondering, and they're eating, and they're drinking, and they're watching these people that they would never associate with, because you don't associate with them because they're rip-off artists. Because they're looking to take you out. Because they only care about themselves. Because they don't believe the way that we believe. Because they don't go to temple. And here they are eating with them. Verse 11. When the Pharisees, of course, there's always a Pharisee, isn't it? By the way, this message in this series of messages is for three different people. It's for those of us that understand that we're in need of a Savior, that understand where we were when He found us, and that are just grateful for it. And I'd like to put myself in that. It's also for people that are wondering, that are thinking, I can't be good enough. I can't do this. Well, I got good news for you. You don't have to. But it's also for the people among us that may be smug. The judgmental ones because of their position in organized religion. Because maybe they've been a follower of Jesus a little longer. Maybe because somebody doesn't think politically like they do, because if you're a Christian, you're going to think like this if you really love Jesus. Sort of that smugness that we can get when we forget where we came from. The Pharisees are sort of in that, and remember the Pharisees, it was about their religion. It was about how they could use their religion to manipulate. And so when the Pharisees saw this, of course, the very first thing they ask is the question that is probably even on Jesus' disciples' lips. That's right here in their mind. He says, why does your teacher, notice what they did. They asked his disciples, isn't that what Pharisees do? They didn't ask Jesus. You see that? They didn't go, excuse me, Jesus, just quick question, Jesus. Why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners? No. they go to his disciples to try to get them to question whether he really is who he says he is. Is he really the Messiah? Because obviously, if he was the Messiah and he was in King David's line, he certainly wouldn't be the guy that would be associated with tax collectors and sinners. And then Jesus, on hearing this side discussion, says, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Now, it's easy to take offense at that and go, well, you mean I'm sick? But they knew they were outcast. See, the Pharisees didn't know they were wrong. These guys knew they were wrong. They had been outcast. They couldn't worship. They couldn't do anything. They had to hang out with other tax collectors and sinners. And so Jesus looks at the Pharisees and he goes, listen to me. The people who are healthy, they don't need the doctor. When you get sick, you go to the doctor. Because you're sick. Because you know you have a problem. You seek out the doctor. He says, but go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Whoops. See, Pharisees always wanted sacrifice. They always wanted to add more burdens on people. They always wanted to make them, you got to do this and follow this and this and this and this and this. And Jesus says, you're missing it. I'm not looking for sacrifice. I desire mercy. And then he said this, why? Because I have not come to call the righteous. Here it is. But I've come to call sinners. Do you know why Matthew included Tamar? Do you know why he included Rahab? You know why he included, let's see, remember when Prince changed his name? We'll change Bathsheba's to the woman formerly known as Uriah's wife. You know why he included these folks in there? Because Matthew wanted them to know that Jesus didn't come for the perfect people. He came for the imperfect people who knew they were imperfect. He came for those folks. He came, as a matter of fact, to change everything for the outcast. Changed everything for the outcast. That here you have people who are outcasts, and they're wondering, what in the world is going on? They feel isolated. They feel alone. Outcasts often will feel like people are looking at them, got all of their attention on them, wondering, why are they doing what they're doing? Why do they believe that way? Why do they behave that way? What's wrong with them? Sometimes we ask that question of ourselves. Why do I feel alone? Why do I feel isolated? Why do I feel like nobody cares? Why do I feel like an outcast? I want to say something to you. Remember I talked about the atheists and the agnostics? Let me tell you the biggest lie that you've been told by people in the church is that you have to come to Jesus. Some of you have been around for a while like, whoa, what do you mean? Doctrine alert. Hang on. See, John talks about why Jesus came. He talks about that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Christmas has often been called when God came near. See, I want you to realize something. That Jesus comes to you first. He came to Matthew, walked right up to where he was at, and instead of doing anything different, he didn't say, Matthew, come down here. What he did is he grabbed a chair and he came to Matthew and he sat down and he said, follow me. The good news is that Jesus comes to you first. The good news is that he comes near. And here's the beautiful thing about all of this. God changes in Jesus the outcome for the outcast. If there's one thing I want you to take with you today, he changes the outcome for the outcast. See, if you feel like an outcast, the whole idea is that he changes it all, because now you're not isolated. You're not alone. The whole reason at Christmas is what he did is he came over and he says, look, I'm with you. Come with me. I'm coming to your table. And we're going to sit down and we're going to be connected and we're going to be with one another. And I don't care how you're feeling. I don't care what you look like. I don't care where you've come from. I don't care what other people say about you. I don't care whether your family likes you or doesn't like you. I don't care how you're feeling. I don't care about any of that. What I care about is that I'm coming to you. And so that's what it means when it says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, that God came near to us on Christmas. He changes the outcome for the outcast. See, I think Matthew, you can go sit down. I think Matthew, thank you. I think that Matthew's whole point of why he included all of these people at the screaming at the top of his lungs and then putting the brakes on. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then he's got Tamar in there. And then he includes these other women that were people that no one else would talk about. He's throwing this thing out there, and he wanted to say to them, listen, it's me. I experienced that. I was an outcast. I understood what it was like to be like Tamar. I understood what it was like to be like Rahab. I understood what it was like to be like Ruth. I understood what it was like to be the woman who wasn't even named. I knew what it was like for people to not like me because of where I came from, because of what I believed, because of what I looked like, because of what I'd done, because of where I'd been. And yet, he walked up to me where I was ripping people off, where I was in my element, in my neighborhood, doing my thing. And he walked up to me and he said two words: follow me. And we had dinner. We always make it such a big deal about following Jesus. They had dinner. And Matthew kept following him. And I would like to think that after a little while, the disciples started realizing, oh, now we get it. But Jesus had to keep teaching them. He had to teach them with children. Constantly he had to teach them. And he had to teach the Pharisees. And I'm sure everybody that had been ripped off by Matthew would look at him and say, what is he doing following Jesus? And Jesus probably wanted to look at them and say, listen, this is the point. The point is Matthew. The point is Judas. The point are these fishermen. The point is these are folks that a lot of people didn't have anything to do with. But guess what? This ragtag group of imperfect people are going to change the world. And they did. Even though one of them went by the wayside. And it's Matthew's gospel that says, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the son of David, the son of Abraham. This is the Messiah. The Messiah who doesn't expect you to come to him first. The Messiah who on Christmas came near. What does it mean when he came near? We used to use the term that he pitched his tent among men. You know what? I like this better. You're sitting alone. He picked up a chair. And he sat down across from you. When nobody else would. When everybody else was wondering. Y'all know you got uncomfortable when Lewis went up there. Everybody was like, what's Lewis doing? What's he doing? Why is he going up there? And it was actually uncomfortable to watch him not looking at you and looking up there. Kind of sitting alone. It's a little weird, but we've all been there, haven't we? Can I tell you that you don't have to sit alone at the lunch table anymore? Can I tell you that Jesus is not going to pick you last to be on the basketball team. You are not an outcast when he comes to you. Why? Because he changes the entire outcome. Why? Because he says, we saw in the verses before this, you are forgiven. If you've behaved badly, you are forgiven. If you're bitter, you are forgiven. If you've hated somebody, you're forgiven. If you've walked out on somebody, you're forgiven. If you've done the most heinous thing that you could think of, when he comes to you and says, follow me, and you follow him, guess what? You may not think it's fair in your arrogance. For some of you, they think, well, that's not right. Then you have a problem too. Because guess what? He can forgive the most vilest of things. Why? Because he's Jesus. And because that's who he came for. I hope that you'll join us for the rest of the series, because we're going to be talking about a lot of imperfect people. And I don't know about you, I identify with them. And I hope that you will too. And I hope that you'll bring some people with you, because I want folks to realize that this is why he came. This is what Christmas is all about. The baby in a manger, that's cool. But it's why the baby in the manger came. That is everything. Let's pray.